Late May 1944, Pointe du Hoc, Normandy. A bitter wind crawled across the cliff top, carrying with it the scent of salt and damp stone. In the concrete shadow of the H-636 observation bunker, Oberleutnant Fredo Ebling rested his elbows on the cold parapet, binoculars pressed into his eyes as he studied the horizon. Below him, the limestone wall fell away in a perfect vertical sheet, 100 feet of sheer pale rock plunging to a narrow strip of sand where the waves of the English Channel rolled in slow, steady breaths. It was a landscape engineered by geology and perfected by German calculation. Ebling allowed himself a knowing smile. There were battlefields where bravery mattered, where maneuver might change fate. Pointe du Hoc was not one of them. This position, he believed, was victory by design. Before we continue on this journey, tell me, where in the world are you watching this video? I would love to know where this historic journey has touched you. The young artillerymen behind him, men of the 1260th Army Coastal Artillery Battalion, hardened by years of coastal duty, moved with casual confidence. They oiled the breech blocks of the French-built 155mm GPF guns, cleaned optics, checked ammunition stocks, and prepared periscopes in the casemate construction zone, where reinforced concrete towers jutted from the earth like unfinished tombs. To these soldiers, the cliffs were not merely terrain, they were armor. Not the kind forged in steel foundries, but the kind carved by nature, tested by centuries, and now claimed by the Wehrmacht as an impenetrable fortress. Ebling lowered his binoculars and exhaled a sharp breath. No assault force can climb these under fire, he remarked to a nearby non-commissioned officer. Not in daylight, not in darkness, not ever. It was an assessment repeated so often it had hardened into doctrine. The mathematics were merciless. 100 feet of vertical ascent, zero cover, full exposure to interlocking machine gun positions spaced at 75 meters, defenders able to fire almost directly downward. Even a simple rock dropped from such height became a lethal projectile. Under these conditions, time was not measured in minutes but in casualties per meter. For the garrison of Pointe du Hoc, this was not arrogance, it was physics. What no one atop the cliffs knew was that across the Channel, in a series of guarded rooms in London and Portsmouth, Allied planners were staring at the same photographs, the same measurements, the same cliffs, and they were coming to the opposite conclusion. Not because physics was wrong, but because the war demanded that someone challenge it. The story of how the impossible became reality begins not on the cliffs themselves, but in 1940, when German engineers first surveyed the promontory. Pointe du Hoc sat directly between the beaches that would later be known as Utah and Omaha, a natural artillery platform commanding more than 12 miles of coastline. From here, 6 155mm guns, captured from the French but embraced by the Reich, could lob 95-pound shells up to 20,000 yards. A single, well-directed salvo could dismember landing craft, obliterate tank columns forming on the beach, and stall an amphibious assault before it began. By March 1944, when Field Marshal Erwin Rommel visited the site, the Atlantic Wall was his personal obsession. He walked the cliff edge, letting the wind lash at his greatcoat, and wrote in his diary that an enemy assault from the sea was tactically impossible. He stated that the position was stronger by nature than any fortification they could construct. Photographs show him pointing toward the horizon, officers nodding around him, their eyes carrying not anxiety but assurance. The guns, the cliffs, the casemates, the trenches, the minefields. It all pointed to one truth. Pointe du Hoc was untouchable. But war has a way of proving engineers wrong. When intelligence officers at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force analyzed the site in early 1944, they calculated the potential destruction the guns could inflict on D-Day. Even firing blind, the 6 howitzers could turn Utah and Omaha into slaughterhouses. General Omar Bradley stared at the map, tracing with his thumb the line separating success from catastrophe. Remove the guns and the beaches had a chance. Leave them intact, and Operation Overlord risked drowning in its first hour. Yet every approach seemed suicidal. Drop paratroopers inland. The Norman bocage, with its dense hedgerows, deep sunken lanes, and poor visibility, made rapid action unlikely. Bombard the position into rubble. The casemates under construction were so thick that even 14-inch naval shells might not crack them. Send infantry up the beach, they would be butchered under the guns. That left one option. An option no, textbook endorsed, no strategist recommended, no engineer endorsed. A direct assault from the water, land at the base of the cliffs, climb them under fire, reach the guns before they could be brought to bear. Bradley turned to a man young enough to volunteer, yet experienced enough to understand the cost. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, Texas-born reserve officer, commander of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Rudder studied the photographs spread across the table, the cliffs rising like stone blades from the sand. He nodded once. "My men can do it, sir," he said. Those 5 words would carry extraordinary weight. Training began in April 1944 on the chalk cliffs near Swanage in southern England. The Rangers found themselves in the company of British commandos, men hardened in raids against Loffoot and Vargzo Dieppe. These veterans taught techniques born not from theory but from survival. How to climb when someone above you is trying to kill you. How to remain fast when loaded with 60 pounds of gear. How to trust a rope wet with seawater, one wrong step away from snapping. Over and over the Rangers climbed until their hands bled and their arms quivered. They climbed in rain, in wind, at night, with live ammunition overhead. Some fell caught by belay lines or crashing onto mats. In letters home, Rangers wrote of dreams filled with cliffs, water, and the breathless moment between slipping and recovery. They developed rockets, simple, ingenious devices built from British innovation and American determination. Each rocket carried a grapnel and rope. Fired skyward, it would arc over the cliff edge, snag on rock or debris, and create a climbing line. Multiply that by dozens, and the Rangers could weave a vertical assault corridor. Meanwhile, the Germans, confident in their fortress, dug deeper, laid more mines, set more wire, and wrote letters home promising victory. One Unteroffizier described their defensive position as the best on the Atlantic Wall. "The cliffs," he wrote, "are our armor." On the night of June 5th, the Rangers boarded their landing craft. The seas were rough 5-foot swells, slamming the landing craft assault boats as they pushed toward France. Men vomited in their helmets, held fast by the weight of their rifles and ammunition. Others whispered prayers. Yet amid the seasickness and tension, they glimpsed the vast armada moving with them, thousands of ships each carrying men ready to gamble their lives on a single dawn. At 5:50 a.m., the USS Texas opened fire. Her 14-inch guns hurled 1,400-pound shells in a rain of steel onto the cliff top, blasting earth and concrete into plumes visible for miles. The destroyers Satterlee and Talibont joined the bombardment, their 5-inch guns hammering targets along the ridge. The cliff top buckled, split, cratered, but soon the bombardment ended, and the German defenders who survived began to emerge. What followed was a navigation error that nearly doomed the assault. The lead pilot boat drifted off course, pulling the Ranger flotilla nearly 3 miles east. By the time the mistake was corrected, 40 minutes had been lost. The Germans had time to recover. The element of surprise evaporated. The Rangers would climb not in half-light but in full morning sun. At 7:10 a.m., the first landing craft reached the beach, scraping against rocks as the ramps dropped. Colonel Rudder leaped into knee-deep surf, screaming for his men to move. Machine guns opened fire, bullets slapping water and cutting through men as they ran. Rangers stumbled, fell, crawled to the cliff base. They're finally shielded from direct fire, they fired their rockets. Some ropes failed, some fell short, but many found purchase, and the climbing began. It was chaos made vertical. Men heaved themselves upward, boots sliding, fingers, numb bullets whipping past their heads. Germans dropped grenades. Some exploded mid-air, others bounced down the cliff face. Rocks tumbled. One Ranger was struck in the helmet by a falling stone the size of a football, sending him tumbling, but he rose again. Bar gunners at the base poured fire upward, suppressing any German who appeared at the edge. The destroyers moved dangerously close to shore to blast machine gun nests, threatening the climbers. At 7:25 a.m., Sergeant Haywood Robbie Roby reached the top. He saw 3 Germans preparing grenades. His Thompson barked, killing all 3. More Rangers crested the edge, forming a fragile, expanding foothold. But the guns, those massive 155mm beasts, were not there. The casemates were empty. The emplacements contained only painted telephone poles, decoys crafted to fool aerial reconnaissance. Rudder received the news with disbelief and immediate clarity. The guns were somewhere nearby, and they still posed a mortal threat to the invasion. He issued the only order possible: find them, destroy them. The Rangers fanned out across a cratered, debris-strewn landscape. German defenders fought from trenches and tunnels. Snipers fired from hidden pits. Mortars thumped. The coastal road to the south became a front line of its own, where Rangers of Companies D and E set up roadblocks with only a few dozen men. Then, at 8:45 a.m., came the moment that would etch itself into history. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lomell and Sergeant Jack Kuhn followed a sunken lane leading inland. They moved with caution, 2 men alone in enemy territory. Then Lomell froze. Through a slit in the hedge he saw them, 5 of the 6 155mm guns, camouflaged, fully operational. Ammunition stacked nearby, no guards in sight. The guns were pointed toward Utah Beach. Lomell whispered to Kuhn, "Jack, here they are. We've found them." Each man carried 1 thermite grenade, just enough to disable 2 guns, not 5. But seconds mattered more than arithmetic. Lomell crept to the first gun, pulled the pin, dropped the thermite into the recoil mechanism. It ignited silently, 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit of molten metal flowing into the gun's heart. He repeated the process on another. Then, lacking grenades, he used his Thompson wrapped in his jacket to muffle the sound to smash the gun sights on all the guns. The 2 Rangers withdrew, gathered more thermite grenades, returned and destroyed the remaining guns. Then, without warning, the earth exploded. A massive ammunition dump destroyed by another Ranger patrol, detonated with the force of a volcanic eruption. Debris rained from the sky. Lomell and Kuhn were thrown into the lane, dazed, bruised, alive. At 9:05 a.m., the message from Lomell reached Rudder. Located guns, all destroyed, mission accomplished. The artillery threat to Utah and Omaha was gone, but now the Rangers had to survive. Isolated, low on ammunition, surrounded. For the next 2 days, the Rangers fought a desperate battle against counterattacks from the 914th Grenadier Regiment and elements of the 352nd Infantry Division. Mortars fell, snipers hunted, machine gun nests reopened. German troops used tunnels to appear unexpectedly. Ammunition dwindled, water ran low, medical supplies vanished. Many Rangers fought while wounded. Colonel Rudder himself was shot twice and refused evacuation. On the night of June 7th, the Germans launched a full battalion-strength assault. Artillery pounded the Ranger positions. Infantry advanced in waves. At one point, First Sergeant Lomell fired the last 3 rounds from his Thompson, threw his final grenade, picked up a fallen Monet rifle, and continued fighting. At dawn on June 8th, the Rangers were nearly out of ammunition. Many were down to a single clip. Some had only bayonets, yet they held the cliffs. Then at noon, figures appeared on the coastal road. At first, the Rangers braced for a final German attack. Then someone shouted, "They're ours." The relief force had arrived. Of the 225, Rangers who landed only 90 were still able to fight. But the mission was complete. The guns were gone. The highway was cut. The invasion survived. The story of Pointe du Hoc does not end in glory. It ends in understanding. Understanding that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in its presence. Understanding that some missions are measured not in probability, but in necessity. Understanding that war demands of ordinary men feats that should be impossible. The cliffs remain today, scarred, silent, bearing the memory of what happened when 225 Rangers climbed into the jaws of death, because the world's future depended on their ascent. And in the stillness above the channel, amid shattered concrete and wind-scoured stone, the truth lingers like the echo of a lost generation's breath. Some machines of war are built of steel, some are built of concrete, but the rarest and most terrible are built of human will. And Pointe du Hoc was taken because the men who climbed those cliffs carried a will stronger than stone, stronger than physics, stronger than the fortress built to destroy them. A victory carved not by metal but by the hands of men who dared the impossible and paid for it in blood.